Hi, my name's William, and today we're going to be going over the EFM1 synthesizer that is included with Logic. I just opened it up here and made it a little bit bigger so it's easier for us to see. So right off the bat, it looks like there's a little bit going on here, but it's not too hard to know once we really get into these knobs and know what each of these parameters does. So right off the bat, over here on the right side, what we have is the carrier oscillator. Now this is the main oscillator of this synth, and it has a fine-tune knob, a harmonic knob which will adjust it, and a fixed button. Over on the left side, we have the modulator oscillator, and it has the same setup, except instead of a fixed knob, we have a modulator wave knob. Going to the top of the synth, we have some global parameters on the outer ring here. We have, starting on the very left, we have a fine tune of cents, which is a very small increment in tones. Excuse me. We have a transpose, which is we can transpose the sound up or down a certain amount of semitones or octaves just by clicking on whichever one we want. On the right side, we have voices, which is how many voices will play when we hit a note on the keyboard. Right now it's set to 16. That's the default. I have the factory default preset open here. And right next to the voices, we have the glide, which that will affect how long it takes to transition from one note to the next. And this is in milliseconds. It says right here, ms in small. Looking in the center of the synth at the top, we have a basic ADSR, which stands for attack, decay, sustain, release. This is an attack, decay, sustain, release for the modulation envelope, or for the modulation, excuse me. This is a modulation envelope for this, oscillator right here. And then we also have knobs for modulator pitch and FM depth. And also one thing that's cool about these knobs is if you have it, off to the side or something, you can just easily click the 0 and it'll center back up to the default value of 0. Going down to the bottom portion of the synthesizer, we have the sub-oscillator level, which that determines how loud the sub-oscillator is. We have the stereo detune, that depends, how much detune we want. Velocity, how hard the notes are going to be hit, and then the main level, or the main volume control of the synth. And then right next to that main volume control, we have an ADSR for the volume. It's the volume envelope. This is like an amp envelope. So it'll determine the overall ADSR of how the overall sound is. Then we have in the center here, we have an LFO, which we can control. And then we have a rate knob as well for how fast or how slow we want that LFO. And then the very last knob we have right here is in the center. This is the frequency modulator knob, which this determines how much modulation we're going to have for this first oscillator, the carrier oscillator. And right now by default we have a little bit of modulation. So let's see what this sounds like. This is the factory default setting. And let's see. I'm just going to hit a C note here. So it sounds kind of bassy. I could obviously go up an octave or two, but it's definitely a little bit of a bassy note. So let's find out right off the bat, because we don't have anything being changed in the harmonics of the carrier oscillator. So what this means is essentially the first oscillator is a C note that I'm pressing, and then this is modulating it by a multiple. Well, it's typically a multiple of the carrier oscillator. So right now it's 1, so they're kind of the same thing, and they're just modulating each other. So let's see what happens when we modulate this a little bit more. You can hear that when we start getting really high up in the frequency modulation, it starts getting a lot of these weird overtones, and it gets a lot brighter, actually. This is pretty typical for any kind of setup you're going to have. If, the more modulation we add to this, the more almost metallic-y sounding it will be. let's see. We have voices, transpose, fine tuning, glide. I mean, these are all very easy to grasp parameters once you understand them. It's nothing too complex. I mean, at the very least, you can always just turn a knob and see what happens. And that's part of the fun of the synthesizers and the synthesizers that are included with Logic. So right now, here's our bass tone again. Here's the tone that we started with. Let's see what happens when we turn up this harmonic knob a little bit. Let's turn it up to let's turn it up all the way up to 12. It's a lot higher in pitch, and that's because it's taking that main C note and it's taking it up an octave, and then this is modulating it up at that same rate since it's multiplied by 1. If we took it up to 2. So you can definitely get some weird sounds in this. Some very screechy sounds. And I mean, I haven't even messed with any of this other stuff. That was just with the carrier oscillator harmonics knob and the modulation oscillator harmonics knob. And just with that, and of course the frequency modulation knob, we can get a lot of these interesting sounds. And then we could go more in depth and change it to a different amount of voices, which 16 will sound much more fuller, which that's what the default was on, so I'll just keep it like that. We can fine tune. It's going to be very hard to hear a difference in this sense because it's such a small increment in pitch change. But there's a lot to this. I mean, every synthesizer is going to have multiple oscillators. It's going to have an ADSR. It's going to have some kind of transpose and voice control, tuning. Most synths have a glide knob, of course, a main level, some kind of detune. It's a matter of just learning what these parameters mean and building off of that. Because once you get the hang of one synth and really understand it, it just makes learning other synths that much easier. And this is a really good synth to start with, since it's just a simple 2-oscillator synthesizer, and it's nothing too crazy. I mean, if you get into some of the other synthesizers, it starts getting a little bit more to understand. But I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this was informational. I hope you took some out of this. Definitely, just keep going and, mess with this as much as you can. I mean, spend an hour, and just make some sounds with the synthesizer here or some of the other synthesizers in the book, and you'll pick up a lot just from playing around with the different parameters and listening and hearing to what they do. Because the best way to learn synthesizers is, well, to use them and to manipulate the parameters. So that's my suggestion to you. I mean, you saw what we could do with just modulating the harmonics knobs and the frequency modulation knob. We could go into a lot of these other things, but I think I'm going to wrap this up now. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned a lot today, and I'll see you next time.